It all began with a roof on the verge of collapsing under the rain. But no one there imagined that what would truly be rebuilt were hearts. Clementine was a widow trying to keep not only the house standing, but also her very hope. Elijah was a man marked by loss who came only to help, and ended up staying to love. Before diving into this unforgettable romance, don't forget to leave your like and subscribe to the channel. Here you will always find deep and passionate love stories, the kind that warm the soul and surprise in the end. Don't leave the story, because what will happen between Elijah and Clementine will touch you, and I promise you'll want to feel every moment until the very last breath. The afternoon in Cedarbrook carried the sweet smell of damp earth announcing more rain, and the sky, fractured by dark clouds, seemed to hold its breath as if hesitating between breaking or forgiving. A restless wind swept across the steps of the modest houses in that village nestled between the mountains, where dust mingled with the rhythmic sound of hammers at the railway construction site in the distance. It was a small place yet pulsating, with a single main street of pale stone, flanked by carefully painted wooden facades, flowers on window ledges, and posters announcing the upcoming Saturday dance. There was a little of everything there. Old Macready's general store, the saloon, the Golden Spur, the church with its simple tower and the bell that marked not only the hours, but also hearts. At the last house after the southern trail, before the climb toward the fields, lived Clementine Kerrigan with her two small children, Willa, 5, and John, 7. And that afternoon, with the sky about to weep, Clementine balanced on an unsteady chair in the middle of the living room, trying in vain to position a basin exactly beneath the persistent drip in the wooden ceiling. Just a little more to the left. "Mama," John said, frowning with concentration, his hair already damp from earlier attempts. "Left from the heart or left from the hat, my boy?" Clementine asked with an encouraging smile, though inside fear stiffened her from head to toe. Willa, lying on the worn rug with a stuffed dog clutched in her arms, swung her feet in the air and hummed a little song Clementine had taught her days earlier, between loaves of bread. There was a home there, simple, humble, but every corner, from the soap-washed curtain to the teapot kept warm on the wood stove, carried the care and love of a woman who refused to let her sorrow spill over her children. "Are you going to let that whole drip on my forehead all night?" John asked with mock indignation, drawing a stifled laugh from his mother. "Well, if it's to baptize those wild ideas of yours, maybe it wouldn't be so bad," she replied, climbing down from the chair and adjusting the red strands that insisted on escaping her braid. But Clementine's green eyes returned to the ceiling with unease. That leak wasn't just inconvenient, it was a sign of bigger trouble. The entire roof was compromised, and with spring rains coming sooner than expected, she knew time was not on her side, nor was money. Later, after Sunday service, Clementine walked the streets of Cedarbrook with the children beside her, and her longtime friend, Mrs. Eunice, holding her arm. The church still echoed with old hymns, and the scent of fresh bread and roasted meat wafted from the back windows, where volunteers prepared the day's delights for the communal lunch offered to the railway workers. "I don't know what to do." "Mrs. Eunice," Clementine murmured, eyes lowered, while timid rays of sun broke through the clouds. "The roof won't last another week like this? I tried to speak with Mr. Harland, but he charges by the day. And well, you know, the cakes are selling, but not enough. You've done far more than is expected of one woman alone, my flower," Eunice said, squeezing her arm. "God knows that. I miss Joseph so much. Oh, if only he were here." "I know, dear. It's not easy to bear such a loss, especially with those two little ones. But listen well, sometimes help comes through hands we don't expect." Elijah Spencer was at the service today, too. He passed through the door with that dog trailing after him, as always. Maybe if... Oh, but hasn't he taken over the railway station construction? He must be very busy. And besides, I couldn't pay him now. It wouldn't be fair. All I can do is pray that God sends provision. If you hear of anyone needing small mending jobs, perhaps you could recommend me. Believe an extra bit won't hurt. Of course, dear. But don't burden yourself with worries, do you hear? Remember today's message. We must lay our burdens at our Lord's feet, for his yoke is light. Surely he is already working on your behalf. Across the street, Elijah himself was passing with firm steps, the discreet spurs on his boots sounding rhythmically against the stone path. Tall, broad-shouldered beneath the white shirt reserved especially for Sundays. He carried his hat in one hand, his gaze steady beneath golden brows. His cognac-colored eyes swept the street naturally, and paused for a moment on that woman in a pale dress, red hair tied with a ribbon, holding her little girl's hand with the boy walking beside her, shielding her from the wind like a miniature gentleman. She looks like a painting of what is lost. And yet she does not yield, he thought. Clementine Kerrigan, widow for 2 years, mother, dedicated, honest, discreet. He had never seen her in a long conversation with any man since her husband's funeral. Always reserved, almost invisible, tending to her home and children with care. But now, to his eyes, full of light, watching her walk hand in hand with the children, a thought brushed him like a melancholy breeze. Amelia would have liked to live something like that too. His sweet Amelia, who had gone too soon, leaving no children, but with a tenderness that still lingered in his memory, like perfume in a handkerchief kept away. When Elijah reached the end of the street, he looked up at the sky, clouded with the same concern he felt for the fragile walls of that house. He exchanged a knowing look with his loyal dog and murmured, "Maybe today is for more than just memories, Wolf Biscuit." Later, after the community lunch, it was Eunice who approached him discreetly at the entrance of the carpentry shop where Elijah was arranging leftover wood, preparing the place for the next day's work. "Mr. Spencer, forgive the trouble. I know it's Sunday, a well-deserved day of rest, but there's a widow very dear to me who needs help. Compromised roof, 2 children at home. She has little means at the moment. She cannot pay now. I know the Lord sees such things and he will not abandon her. But I thought perhaps we could do something to help her through this hardship." Elijah raised his eyes calmly. "You speak of Mrs. Clementine Kerrigan?" Eunice smiled. "Oh, so you saw what I saw, didn't you? She truly needs it, Mr. Spencer. Could you take a look at what can be done?" He adjusted the knife at his belt, placed his hat on his head, and answered simply, All right, I'll stop by today. Oh, thank you. I was certain I could count on you." The sun filtered through the thin curtains of the living room, painting the floor with golden light as Clementine sat with the children on the rug, spreading out sheets, pencils, and a small hand-stitched prayer book. John, focused, was drawing a cross at the top of a little hill. Willa, her golden hair like strands of honey in 2 braids, traced crooked flowers and hearts. Their mother smiled tenderly, knees folded beneath her blue skirt, while her eyes rested for a moment on the window. The sky still threatened rain, but held back the clouds like a man resisting tears. "Mama, do you think angels have beards?" Willa asked suddenly, holding her pencil like an imaginary magic wand. "Some do, some don't," Clementine replied, adjusting her daughter's collar. "But I think all of them know when a house needs help." It was at that moment that 3 firm knocks sounded at the door. Clementine startled slightly. She wasn't expecting visitors. Rising with the lightness of someone trying to hide haste, she smoothed her tied red hair, her breath still in rhythm with the words she'd been reading, and cautiously pulled back the curtain. On the other side, under the diffused light of the afternoon, stood Elijah Spencer. Clean, impeccable, hat in hand, and his beard faintly shadowing a strong jaw. His light shirt carried the scent of freshly cut wood, and his cognac-colored eyes, silent, warm, met hers with something between reverence and respect. She went to the door and opened it with a touch of hesitation. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Kerrigan. Forgive me for coming like this unannounced," he said, his low voice carrying the sound of a man who weighs his words out of wisdom, not uncertainty. "I heard you're having trouble with your roof. I came to offer help." She stood still. Her hand held the knob the way one holds their dignity. Her green eyes seemed to waver for an instant, and Elijah saw there something he knew well. The fear of a burden, the shame of lack, and the wish not to be a weight. The kind of pain that isn't spoken but is read. "I truly appreciate it, but I can't pay you, Mr. Spencer," Clementine said, sweetly and embarrassed. Her voice came out small but steady. "At least not now." Elijah dipped his head a little, with that half-smile that seemed to live at the corner of his mouth since boyhood. Sunday afternoon is also a day for good works, as our Lord taught. You don't need to worry about payment. I've got my tools with me, some shingles stored in the barn, and enough time to make sure your little ones don't sleep under a drip tonight. Clementine felt her chest tighten, not only at the unexpected kindness, but at the delicacy with which he offered it. No demand, no pity. Simply the way a man recognizes a woman holding the world up with her own hands, and still standing. She wanted to answer, to thank him, to say something worthy of such kindness, but the lump in her throat rose too quickly, and all she managed was a nod. Damp lashes, a heart left unguarded. Elijah took a discreet step back, respectful as ever. "If you'll allow me, would be an honor to help," he finished. He turned toward Hailstorm, the horse who waited with the patience of one who already knew this kind of mission. The dog was already lying under the fence as if to say, "At last we're going to work on something that matters." Clementine closed the door slowly, her back against the wood that for years had held back more than wind and rain. Inside, John was peeking through the crack of the window, eyes wide with contained excitement. "Mama, is it true? He's going to fix our roof?" She looked at him with a smile born from a forgotten place. "He is, my love. God sent us an angel with a hat and a hammer." And that afternoon, while sunlight still held out between clouds and the sound of the hammer began to echo over damp wood, steady and patient, something inside that simple house, and inside Clementine, quietly began to be rebuilt. The damp wood gave a little beneath Elijah's knees as he worked on the Kerrigan roof. The broken shingles, sometimes patched with thin slats, said much without saying anything. He knew this kind of improvised care. It wasn't neglect, it was an attempt. It was a woman trying to hold the roof with bare hands to shield her children from a life that dripped through the cracks. He hammered in silence, a silence full of listening. Down below, the house breathed a warm fragrance of fresh bread, with a soft touch of cinnamon, orange blossom, and wood smoke. Elijah caught the scent drifting from the kitchen window, and more than the aroma of food, there was a breath of home, of human warmth, of someone determined to tend the little they had with devotion. As he adjusted the shingles, his eyes slid discreetly through an open gap into the house. He saw Clementine spreading a small quilt over the chair in the parlor, her red hair tied with a faded blue ribbon, her movements contained yet always delicate, as if grace lived in her without her even knowing it. Farther out, John watched him from the yard with a long stick in hand, imitating a hammer. The boy walked with a comic, earnest authority, as if he already knew the weight of caring for his mother and sister. "Curious?" Elijah asked with a half smile, climbing down the ladder slowly. "Want to come up here and see it up close?" John hesitated, but his eyes flashed like lightning in a clear sky. "Can I really?" "You can, yes, sir. But carefully, and only as far as I say." Clementine appeared in the doorway, her expression startled for a second. "He won't be in your way?" she asked, polite but tense. "Not at all. He's going to learn," Elijah answered naturally. "Men learn early when there's something to protect." Clementine regarded him for a brief moment, and perhaps for the first time in a long while, her eyes rested a little. John climbed up with Elijah's help, guided by him like a patient teacher. He explained the proper overlap of the shingles, the importance of the angle, and how water always finds a path if you don't build a barrier. "Just like problems, huh?" the boy commented, guileless. "Just the same," Elijah said, ruffling his hair. Down below, Wolf Biscuit had already stretched out with his head on Willa's legs, and she giggled every time the dog lifted one ear at the sound of her voice. "He's so fluffy, Mama. Do you think we can brush him with Grandpa's brush?" "Maybe, sweetheart. But ask his owner first, all right?" When Elijah finished the initial work, he'd already secured part of the inner sheathing and replaced 5 shingles that were nearly rotten. The sky had begun to shade into violet, and the mountain's shadows drifted slowly across the slopes. He lingered there for a moment, sitting on the edge of the roof, breathing the clean, cold air. His body, tired, asked for rest, but his soul was curiously still. Then he heard Clementine's voice. "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." Her soft voice mingled with the creak of old boards. "He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters." The words echoed from the parlor, and he could feel the children nestled around her. But it was Willa's voice that pierced Elijah like an arrow of prayer. "Mama, do you think the shepherd in the psalm sent Mr. Elijah to fix our roof?" There was a brief pause. "It's just that today I asked in secret. I said it real quiet, and now he's up there on our house." Elijah closed his eyes, and without realizing it, he let the feeling rise. The tears came simply, without fanfare, like a good rain that waters dry ground. "Can we pray and thank him for that?" the little girl asked. "Of course we can, Flower." Clementine answered, her voice thick with sweetness. Elijah stayed there unmoving, listening. When the prayer ended, he looked up at the sky darkening little by little. "Thank you," he whispered, and began to climb down. Moments later at the door, Clementine waited for him with a light linen cloth in her hands. "Emmy baked this bread earlier. It's simple, but I made it with care. And there's a bit of stew. It's still warm. Maybe it'll help on your way back." Elijah took the bundle carefully, as if more than food had been placed in his hands. "Ma'am, this is worth more than a lot of gold out there." "Thank you." Willa ran to him, wrapping one small arm around the leg of his trousers. "Are you coming back tomorrow?" "I am. We've still got work to do." Outside, in the diffuse light of dusk, John stared fixedly at the horse. "What's his name?" Elijah stepped closer, stroked the animal's neck with affection, and answered, "This one ran with me through a hailstorm in Montana. And he didn't stop, not even when I was bleeding on my left side. From that day on, he never left me behind. I named him Hailstorm." John's eyes went wide. "Wow, he really does look like a hero." Clementine watched the scene in silence, the wind playing through the loose strands of her red hair. "Hailstorm," she said softly. "A beautiful name, rough and strong." Elijah looked at her, his eyes still faintly misted, like some good things life sends after the rain. Willa, still holding the dog's tail, shouted with laughter, "Be careful, Mr. Elijah, and come back soon with Wolf Biscuit." "You can count on it," he replied, mounting his horse with a steady gesture. Clementine stood in the doorway, cloth in her hands, eyes on the horizon, heart somewhere it had never been before, outside her chest. Elijah rode slowly down the trail to the dirt road. The dog followed, hesitant. The house behind him, now secure beneath the repaired roof, seemed to breathe differently. And even without turning back, Elijah knew the lights shining inside did not come only from the lamp. The next morning arrived the way the best promises of the day do, with a clear sky, the distant aroma of fresh coffee, and the sound of roosters punctuating life as if to announce, the world still turns. Elijah was riding along the dirt trail that wound through gentle hills until it reached the Kerrigan's home. The road, though short, was far enough from town to leave it a little exposed. A home among the fields, surrounded by silence and vulnerability. With his hat tilted slightly for shade, Elijah guided Hailstorm attentively. His cognac-colored eyes didn't just look, they assessed. He noticed the east fence of the property was leaning, perhaps weakened by the strong winds of the last storm. A few nails could fix it, but it already sparked his protective instinct. He saw no coyote tracks, but the chickens roaming too freely in the yard could draw unwanted attention. His fingers brushed unconsciously against the knife strapped to his belt. It wasn't paranoia, it was habit. He was the kind of man who looked at the world with the responsibility of a protector, even if he hadn't yet been invited to be one. He reached the house and, as the day before, dismounted carefully, placing the tools on the stone wall that bordered part of the front garden. The dog trotted ahead as if he already had a permanent post there, and was greeted by an ecstatic Willa, who, upon seeing him, squealed, "Wolf Biscuit is back, Mama." She ran barefoot across the thin grass, hair wild like fire in the wind. Elijah tapped lightly on the threshold, and Clementine opened the door with a restrained smile. She wore the cream dress reserved for simpler days, sleeves rolled up, and an apron scented with yeast and cinnamon. "Good morning, Mr. Spencer. Thank you for coming back so early. I hope we didn't tire you out too much. Did you sleep well?" "I did, ma'am. Better than I have in a long time, actually. And thank you for the meal. I haven't eaten anything so delicious in years," he confirmed with a sincere smile. "And did the roof hold well through the night breeze?" "Not a single drop on the pillows. The children woke up disappointed they couldn't hear the dripping anymore. They smiled. and for a moment their gazes crossed like two birds meeting mid-flight, continuing side by side without yet knowing why. That morning, Elijah climbed back onto the roof, replacing the remaining shingles, reinforcing the internal beams with neatly aligned nails. John, as on the day before, helped silently, absorbing each instruction as though they were sacred scripture. Below, Willa fed Wolf Biscuit a piece of stale bread while Clementine prepared lunch. Around noon, when the sun was sliding down the mountain slopes, Clementine opened the door and called, "Lunch is ready. If you'd accept, Mr. Spencer, it would be an honor to have you at our table." Elijah looked down, hands covered in sawdust, forehead glistening under the sun. "It would be my pleasure, ma'am. Let me wash up first." The table was simple, yet carefully set. Cloth napkins, a pitcher of water with sprigs of mint, a dish of homemade bread, and a steaming bowl of beef stew with potatoes. The smell was welcoming, human, familiar. Elijah sat with the posture of a man who knows he is a guest, polite, cautious, but observant. Willa watched him as if he were one of the heroes from the stories her mother read at bedtime. "And the station?" Clementine asked, serving him a generous piece of bread. "I heard it's to begin construction next week. We'll start the pillars on Monday. The main structure comes after. With luck, in 3 months the train will reach this area. And with it, the commotion." He took a sip of water and continued, "But also new opportunities." "Opportunities?" John asked, curious. "More jobs to start with. More people. New things." Elijah smiled faintly. "Maybe even a man selling candies with names hard to pronounce. I'd take candy that tastes like shoe leather at this point," Clementine said with unexpected humor, blushing as soon as she realized what she'd said. Elijah laughed, truly laughed, and the sound filled the room like unexpected music. "Don't say that. I might just take you to try one someday and you'll regret it. Shoe leather or not, nobody stays the same after the first bite of molasses and walnut candy." She tried to hide her smile, but her eyes betrayed her. And Elijah noticed the subtle beauty of that face that lit up between pots and pans. The delicate neck, the gentle voice that held more strength than it revealed. He also noticed how she deflected compliments, like someone who had suffered too much to believe she deserved to be seen. After lunch, as Clementine cleared the plates with careful, graceful movements, the front door creaked open with the familiar groan of old hinges. The sound was preceded by a voice that carried years of authority mixed with sweetness. "If I'd known it smelled this good, I'd have come before the amen." Clementine smiled before she even turned. "Come in or call, Mrs. Eunice. But if you're coming in like this, at least tell me you bring good news." The lady entered with firm steps despite her cane, wearing her simple shawl and sharp gaze behind crooked spectacles. Her eyes turned to Elijah with knowing delight. So Mr. Spencer is helping you with this roof?" Elijah rose politely, wiping his hands on a cloth and giving a slight nod. "Yes, ma'am. And I can assure you the honor has been all mine." Eunice studied him for a second, as if measuring not just the size but the solidity of the wood. "Good man. Rare are those who show up with tools and leave behind peace," Elijah answered with a modest smile. No boast, only the quiet firmness of someone who knows the weight of what he does. And why. "You're being generous, ma'am. But the blessing, I believe it's been more mine than theirs." Eunice turned her eyes to Clementine and raised one sharp brow. "And you, young lady, feeding a worker with stew that makes you want to get down on your knees? That's how you'll make the man never want to leave." "Mrs. Eunice, please," Clementine murmured, cheeks flushed with an inevitable pink. Elijah, leaning back in his chair, held back a smile. He didn't laugh. He simply noticed the blush and the faint embarrassment glowing on Clementine's delicate skin, and somehow, it warmed him inside. But his eyes said he had heard and understood, and that perhaps he liked the idea of not leaving so soon. Minutes later, he stepped outside to continue the final repairs, followed closely by John and Willa, who skipped around with the dog in tow. The sky was clear, the air gently warm. The house, though still modest, already seemed wrapped in another kind of atmosphere. A new safety, a different sound. While adjusting a beam on the side of the roof, Elijah kept his ear tuned to the children's light conversation. Willa laughed loudly, spinning in the yard with Wolf Biscuit tumbling after her like an animated toy. Tripping over his own paws, John, more reserved, watched for a moment before stepping closer to Elijah, hands in his pockets, as though carrying a weight he didn't yet know how to name. "Mr. Elijah, speak, boy. Do you think a boy can grow up and take care of an entire house? Of a mother? Of a sister?" Elijah stopped what he was doing. He crouched down slowly, bringing himself to the boy's eye level. "I think a boy with courage in his chest is already half a man. But I also think no man takes care of everything alone. Nor should he. Life is meant to be shared." John nodded thoughtfully. Then he lowered his voice. "Well, it's just that my father died while working in the mine. And sometimes when we're already in bed, Mama cries softly. She thinks we're asleep and can't hear. But I hear. I pretend I don't so she won't stop. I think that if she cries enough, maybe the sadness will leave her and she'll be happy again." The words struck Elijah like a sure arrow. No fanfare, no haste, but straight into the center of his chest. He ran a hand over the boy's hair, with the firmness of someone who knows the pain of wanting to protect someone you love, without being able to stop the world from hurting them. "You have a big heart, John, and big hearts feel more. But they also make others feel safer. Your mother is lucky to have you, and so is your sister." John tried to hide his pride and then ran off to play with Willa, who was now wrapping Wolf Biscuit with the colorful scarf given the day before. Elijah stayed there for another minute, watching. The children's laughter, the simple, clean house, the smell of bread still lingering in the air, and the image of Clementine at the door, a cloth in her hands, her hair now half loose, watching her children with the silent care of someone who keeps vigil over the world. He fastened the last beam, climbed back onto the roof, and as the sun slid across the mountains in the distance, he began to think that perhaps that house no longer needed just a roof repair. The little town of Cedarbrook pulsed in a quiet rhythm beneath the spring sky, with light dust dancing around the boots and wagons crossing the main street. The wood of the houses creaked softly under the morning sun, and the sounds of everyday life wove together in harmony. The tinkling of the store bell, the squeak of the bank gate, muffled laughter of children running between the church pillars. Clementine walked with her hair pulled back in a simple style, her light dress neatly pressed, the small shopping basket dangling from her arm. In her other hand, she held Willa, who hopped along the cobblestones as if each step were an imaginary challenge. "Mama, can I pick the shiniest buttons this time?" the girl asked, pointing to the window of the sewing shop. "As long as they're not too golden, or people will think we're going to a high society ball," Clementine teased. And Willa let out a laugh so light it seemed made of wind. That was when she saw him. Elijah was leaving the carpentry shop, carrying 2 wide boards on his shoulder. His light shirt clung slightly to his chest in the day's heat, and his fair hair was tousled, as if it had fought with the wind. He turned and his cognac eyes met hers. "Mrs. Kerrigan, Mr. Spencer." They both paused for a second. And there, in that ordinary moment between coming and going, something changed. An invisible thread stretched between them, discreet but real. "How are the children?" he asked, lowering the boards with ease as if bending strength with respect. "Well, ever since Wolf Biscuit started visiting, they haven't stopped talking about you. That's Wolf Biscuit's fault. He has the gift of making himself more interesting than his master." She smiled, and her eyes dropped to his hands, calloused, steady. Then back to his face, and for the first time she noticed details she hadn't dared see before. The way he listened with his whole body. The way he smiled only on one side. The warm, cognac-colored eyes, and that quiet warmth that seemed to emanate from him without his trying. "Thank you. Once again, for everything you did. The roof, the time, the patience with John. It was more than a favor." Elijah tilted his head slightly. "I was the fortunate one. Your home has a peace that, well, few places offer." Clementine felt something different spread through her chest, a subtle, unexpected warmth rising as if without asking permission. And she realized, for a brief second, that Elijah Spencer was a handsome man, very handsome. But it was more than looks. There was something in his presence that filled the spaces without fanfare. Before she could say anything more, Willa tugged at her hand to show her something in the shop window. and the moment dissolved like mist in the sun. "Have a good day, Mr. Spencer. And you, Mrs. Kerrigan. Always." 2 days later, the storm came as if the sky were washing the world's soul. Lightning split the mountains and rain drummed on the roof with force and constancy. Clementine squeezed her eyes shut in the dark, covered up to her neck, listening to the dance of raindrops outside. The sound of the wind howling through the cracks in the window made her tense, but there was no leaking. No drops on the wooden floor. No bucket under the bed. She looked up, almost in reverence, and whispered, "Thank you." That night, for the first time in a long time, she slept without her heart clenched. The next morning, a veil of humidity hung over Cedarbrook. The earth exhaled a dark, damp fragrance. The kind of smell that only comes after trust is restored, like the first breath after pain. Clementine was on the porch, her hair still slightly wavy from the night before, sweeping the leaves piled near the door, when she heard familiar footsteps climbing the dirt path. She didn't need to lift her eyes to know. Her heart already knew. And it wasn't startled. Elijah came with firm steps, hat in hand, eyes alert to his surroundings. Even under a gray sky, there was something radiant about him. A kind of strength that didn't need to show off. As he approached, Wolf Biscuit ran ahead, greeting the lady of the house like an old friend. "Mr. Spencer," she said with a restrained smile. "Did you come to check if the roof survived the storm?" "I promised I would. And I confess, I fell asleep thinking about it." "You can rest easy." For the first time in a long time, no bucket was part of the bedroom decor. They both laughed softly. He climbed the 3 steps of the porch, removing his hat with his usual courteous gesture. "Would you accept some coffee?" "It's still hot." "It would be my pleasure, ma'am." They sat at the kitchen table as if it were already a habit, though there was still a hint of hesitation in their movements, an unspoken care between people who recognize each other without yet knowing the name for it. Clementine poured the coffee in silence, and for a few moments all that could be heard was the soft clink of the spoon against the cup and the distant song of a bird too drenched to sing loudly. "Your boy," Elijah began, eyes turned toward the window where the small tracks of Willa's feet showed in the garden mud. "He's a golden boy. His heart's bigger than his chest. Yesterday he told me he wants to grow up to take care of you and his sister." With the seriousness of a full-grown man, Clementine sighed, a smile slipping out like light through a crack. "John was born with a sense of responsibility that sometimes cuts me, as if he wanted to be a man before his time, just to spare me. But I see it in his eyes, and I thank God for every trace of his father that lives there." Elijah nodded, stirring his coffee slowly, as if searching for courage among the spirals of steam rising from the cup. "Amelia and we plan to have children, 2, maybe 3. She used to say she wanted a house with too much laughter, where it'd be impossible to hear your own thoughts. I said one girl with her eyes would make me rich enough." Clementine lifted her face slowly. Her green eyes met his with a tenderness that almost hurt. "I remember her," she murmured. From sight, she walked past the church with that blue ribbon hat. And a look, serene but firm. I always thought she was the kind of woman who knew what the world needed before the world itself knew. Elijah looked away for a second, pulled under by the memory. The pain wasn't sharp, but it left a trail of longing that never quite burned out. That was her, but she didn't have time to see the children she dreamed of. The illness took more than her body. It took the future we had set down. "I'm so sorry," Clementine said softly. "Losing someone who still fit inside your plans. It's a kind of emptiness that echoes for years." Their eyes met again, this time lingering. There was no pity there, no measuring of grief, only an invisible mirror where each could see the other's loneliness without needing to touch it. Where every word was a way of saying, "I understand." "And I'm here," Elijah spoke, his voice lower. "You know, I don't know if it's improper to say this, but it's beautiful the way you run this house. How you balance 2 little ones, the work, the hurt, and still keep beauty in your gestures. You're a captivating woman," she flushed. The delicate skin took on a pink that began at her throat and climbed to the tops of her cheekbones. "It's only what I can do. Try to keep their world lighter than the weight that fell on mine." He smiled, that half smile that lived at the left corner of his mouth. the one that seemed to appear only when he allowed himself to feel something more. "Maybe that's what brought me here," he said, almost as if thinking aloud. "A house with weight and lightness, with the smell of bread and a silence that doesn't press down." She held the cup a little tighter, as if trying to keep her heart in her hands. Her eyes didn't look away. Not this time. He didn't step back either. And in that moment, though no words declared it, both of them knew. They were beginning to burn, slowly, but with a heat no one else could ignore. That was when the door banged open, and Willa burst in, hair mussed, dress smeared with dirt. "Mama, Mama! Wolf Biscuit stole my ribbon and he's running with it in the yard." John came right behind her, laughing hard, trying to snatch back the strip of ribbon flying like a flag from the dog's mouth. Clementine stood laughing too, and Elijah took the chance to rise. "I think I'd better go, before the girl's ribbon becomes a hunting trophy." She walked him to the door, heart still racing, her body still claimed by the heat of that silence that had said so much. "Thank you for coming and for everything." He looked at her once more, the amber eyes settling on hers with a kind of tenderness that already seemed to have roots. "See you soon, Mrs. Kerrigan. See you soon, Mr. Spencer." But neither of them turned away at once. They lingered there, their gazes held by an invisible thread stretched taut between them, and if it were plucked, it might sing. The sound of nails driven into the new station's beams echoed like a drum through Cedarbrook's ground. Steady, rhythmic, almost solemn. Progress was arriving on rails, steel, and promises. The town took on a new tempo, as if the dust that always covered the main street now danced with expectation. There were murmurs at windows, watchful eyes at corners, laughter on the church benches, and a new kind of hope hanging in the air. Elijah Spencer was among the men raising the timber frame on the newly granted lot at the east edge of town. Strong arms, skilled hands, sure movements. He stood out, not for show, but because he carried a quiet kind of leadership that naturally drew respect. Working with his sleeves rolled to the elbows, muscles defined by labor, he fastened each board like a man building more than a station, a future. Clementine saw him from afar that day, as she delivered her first loaves to the general store. Mrs. Redmay, the owner, had finally agreed to test her goods. The order was small, but enough to rekindle something that had slept in Clementine for a long time. Dignity, a living earned by her own hands. Dough kneaded before dawn, the sweet scent that soaked the house, the yeast rising like her hope, and every time she walked back down the street with the children, Willa searched for Elijah with eager eyes. "Do you think Mr. Spencer is coming today, Mama?" "He's got a lot of work, darling. Maybe tomorrow." John, more reserved, only watched, but deep down, he hoped too. The next afternoon, Clementine was tying the new ribbons she'd bought with her first payment from the store when she heard the latch on the gate jingle. It wasn't visiting hour, but her heart knew before her eyes did. Elijah appeared with the sun at his back and a brown paper package tucked under his arm. He came slowly, as if respecting someone else's pace. The dog came along too, wearing the colorful scarf Willa had given him, now washed and neatly knotted. Clementine opened the door with a confused smile. "Good evening, Mr. Spencer. I wasn't expecting company today. John asked me to stop by. Wanted to know if I remembered my promise, and I figured I'd better keep it." The boy popped up behind his mother, trying to hide the excitement on his face. "I just thought maybe you'd forgotten," he said, nudging a pebble with his boot. Elijah knelt and handed John the package. Inside was a small hand-carved wooden box with secret compartments, meant to hold important man things: an old pocket knife, a broken compass that still found north, and a simple leather belt with an iron-worked buckle. "This was mine when I was your age," and he said, "I thought it might serve now, for someone who already carries himself like a man, even if he's only a boy on the outside." John looked at him as if receiving a knight's sword. Pride swelled his chest. His eyes brimmed, but he didn't let it fall. "I'll take care of it. I promise." "I know you will." Willa appeared right after, hair half-pinned any which way. "And me, did I get anything?" Elijah smiled and pulled from his pocket a pale blue ribbon with tiny daisies embroidered by hand. "It's to replace the one Wolf Biscuit turned into a war trophy," she squealed with delight, and ran inside to show her mother in the mirror. Clementine watched the scene, hands clasped at the apron, eyes fixed on him with a kind of tenderness that was becoming familiar and harder to hide. "I don't know what to say," she murmured, voice thick with gratitude. They needed this more than anyone could have known. Elijah lifted his eyes to hers. They fell quiet for a moment. The evening light gilded the loose strands of Clementine's red hair, dancing like fine flames over her shoulders. And for the first time, Elijah wanted to reach out and touch them. "Sometimes," he said in a lower voice, "all we need is someone who sees, who looks at what's inside and offers something back." Even if it's a small gesture, she didn't look away. And for a second, the world hung suspended between them. "You've been seeing more than you should, Mr. Spencer. Only what your eyes allow, Mrs. Kerrigan." The way he said it, with that formality loaded with restrained desire, made her chest vibrate like a taut string. She felt it, and so did he. This was growing, smoldering slowly like an ember feeding on silence itself. But before anything else could be said, old Mr. Carver rattled past on the road with his donkey and called out, grinning, "Well now, if that isn't the handsomest couple in the county." "When's the announcement going in the paper?" Elijah took a step back, smiling to himself. Clementine flushed to the tips of her ears. "Good evening, Mr. Carver," she said crisply. The man went on, still laughing. "People in small towns have quicker tongues than legs," Elijah remarked, amused, "and ears sharper than a hammer." They shared a conspiratorial glance. The children came running soon after, the dog in the middle of the commotion. Mom, can I sleep with the ribbon in my hair? Only if you promise it'll still be there when you wake up." Laughter filled the yard. Elijah adjusted his hat, ready to leave. "I'll come by another day. If there's still something left to fix around here." "There always is," Clementine answered without thinking. Then softening, "But only if you feel like it." Their eyes met again, and this time they lingered. Their gazes spoke, and what they said could no longer fit in silence. He mounted Hailstorm. Biscuit was already waiting, tail wagging. But before leaving, Elijah turned back one last time. "Good night, Clementine." It was the first time he called her by name. She smiled in a way she hadn't in years. A full smile, alive, true, and he felt his heart tremble like wood under a new nail. The sky that night was clearer than usual, as if the stars had gathered for some kind of silent vigil over Cedar Brook. The breeze carried the sweet scent of wildflowers, mingled with the familiar aroma of fresh bread, escaping through the Kerrigan windows. In the yard, fireflies flickered among the low branches, and crickets formed a timid chorus, as if they knew they weren't the center of the scene. John appeared at the door with flushed cheeks, and the posture of someone trying to look older than he was. He walked over to Elijah, who was sitting on the porch bench, cleaning the blade of his pocket knife with a cloth. "Mr. Elijah?" "Go on, boy. I heard there's going to be a town festival next week, with dancing and all, and He coughed, trying to sound casual. "Well, I wanted to learn. Before someone laughs at me." Elijah raised an eyebrow, surprised and amused. "Dancing, huh?" "Yeah, I want to know how it's done, for real. I saw you moving your feet when we heard music at the general store the other day, and I thought, if even you dance, maybe I can too." Clementine appeared behind the boy, with a smile on her lips and a dish towel in her hands. "I heard that, and I can confirm he was keeping his feet in time." Elijah chuckled and rose slowly, brushing imaginary dust from his pants. "Well, dancing isn't all that different from building a roof. Just follow the right rhythm and keep your center steady." "That's confusing," John made a face. "But all right, I can try." Elijah led him to the middle of the yard, under the soft glow of the lanterns Clementine lit every night, hanging from the lemon tree branches. First the feet. 1, 2, 1, 2, like marching, but lighter. "Now watch mine," he said, moving with a lightness that even surprised Clementine, who stood on the porch, arms crossed, eyes fixed. John tried copying the steps, stumbling, stepping on his own toes, laughing at his mistakes. "I look like a duck. I've seen ducks clumsier than that." "You're doing fine." Willa came out sleepy, a blanket draped over her shoulder, and threw herself onto Biscuit, using him as a living pillow. "I just want to watch and sleep here." Clementine stepped down the porch slowly, wiping her hands on her apron. Her eyes were no longer merely curious. There was something else. Something that had been smoldering for days. An ember. A tremor under her skin, Elijah noticed. "Want to help with the demonstration?" he asked, extending his hand as if it were the most natural thing in the world. She hesitated for a second. The cloth in her hands, her heart in her belly. Then she lifted her eyes and saw he was asking with his gaze before his hand. "It's been a long time since I danced," she said almost as a warning. "Me too, but we improvise. Like we always do with the important things." She placed her hand in his. It was just hand in hand, but it felt like a promise. Elijah drew her gently, guiding her to the center of the yard as if an invisible orchestra played just for them. Her feet moved lightly, first tense, then free, carried by the sound of crickets, the wind, and the timid laughter slipping from her lips. He held her firmly but without demand, with strength but also admiration. "Tiny," he said suddenly in the middle of a slow turn. "Tiny? From Clementine. And because, well, you've got this delicate, light way about you, like something you hold carefully so it doesn't break." She laughed softly, embarrassed, but her face lit from within. "It's been a long time since anyone's called me anything new. Maybe it's time someone did." They looked at each other, for longer than expected, for longer than she was ready for, and yet, she didn't look away. He guided her gently through a slower turn. The warmth of his touch seeped through the thin fabric of her dress, and she felt at peace, as if life had found its rhythm again. Her heart beat differently, like a drum in her chest, like a signal of life. "Tiny," he repeated, lower now. "Yes?" she whispered, as if she no longer knew what was yes and what was just feeling. But before anything else could be said, Willa snored lightly atop the dog. John stifled a laugh and came closer, eyes shining. "You two dance well, even without music." Clementine stepped back, smoothing her skirt, her face flushed to the soul. Elijah only nodded, accepting that the moment had ended, but not been forgotten. She walked to Willa and picked her up, the girl still half asleep. John leaned closer to Elijah and whispered, "One day, I'll dance like that too. You will, boy. And when you do, you'll know more than just how to dance." Elijah said goodnight with a nod. But as he passed Clementine, he looked into her eyes with a warmth that could no longer be hidden. "Good night, Tiny." She bit her lip without answering, and that said more than 1,000 words. The silence between them already burned like a touch, and the dance was not over. The morning rose with a gentler warmth than usual, and the breeze sweeping through the Kerrigan yard carried the scent of earth, shy blossoms, and the promise of harvest. Clementine watched from the window as Elijah, kneeling beside John, dug small furrows with steady hands, guiding the boy and planting seeds, beans, corn, simple herbs, things that could easily take root in the soft ground near the lemon tree. "A straight line, John," he said patiently, "like life tries to be. But we both know roots have a will of their own." John laughed, head lowered, feeling important under the guidance of a man who now belonged to his world. Inside, Clementine sat on a wicker chair with Elijah's shirt spread across her lap, passing the needle through the fabric as if she touched something precious. One of the lemon tree thorns had torn the seam at the shoulder earlier, and she had offered to mend it. When he had taken it off, standing there in just the light undershirt, her heart had faltered in silence. It was impossible not to notice. The arms carved by work, the broad shoulders, the natural way the fabric seemed molded to him, like it was part of his skin. She had tried to keep her eyes on the children, but failed. Now with the shirt in her hands, she lifted it to her face instinctively. The scent was clean, warm, masculine, like wood freshly cut in the sun. And there was something else. A softer note, hard to name, a kind of peace. The scent of a man who makes himself present, even when he doesn't speak. And for the first time since Joseph, Clementine felt her whole body respond. Her stomach tighten, her chest heat, her skin remembering what it was to want. She looked out again and saw Elijah rise, reaching to help John press down the last mound of soil. Willa came running with the watering can, laughing as she soaked her brother's boots more than the plant. That scene, that image, it was more than help. It was a presence filling gaps Clementine hadn't known how to name. When Elijah stepped into the kitchen with muddy shoes and a lightly sweat-dampened brow, Clementine had finished the mending. She stood with the shirt folded in her arms. He paused before her. The morning light fell through the window, cutting them out like a delicate paper silhouette. "Here it is. Stronger than the lemon tree now, if I may say so." "You may. And thank you," he said, taking the shirt and letting his hand brush hers without haste. "You've got hands that are steady and gentle. A rare combination." She offered a restrained smile, but her eyes betrayed her heart. "I like being here, Tiny," he said suddenly, his voice lower, his gaze fixed. "I like it. More than I should." She turned her face away, not out of shame, but to shield her heart. The words lingered in the air like breeze between branches, and she welcomed them, as one welcomes something too precious to answer quickly. Moments later, as she reached to adjust a cloth by the stove, her hair slipped free of the ribbon and fell in soft waves around her shoulders. Elijah stepped closer without a word. He touched the strands gently, gathering them between his fingers before tying them with a new ribbon he found on the doorframe. "There," he said, his voice husky with a fire inside. "It's like the world falls into place." She didn't answer. She couldn't. She was too busy holding her heart in place. By late afternoon, after helping John cover the last seeds and saying goodbye to the children with affection that no longer needed words, Elijah came to Clementine once more. She stood on the porch in a clean apron, her eyes no longer hiding what had once been only fear. Now it was hope. Elijah took her hand naturally, and before she could say anything, he lifted her knuckles to his lips and pressed a kiss, slow, warm, reverent. It wasn't a kiss of desire. It was a kiss of a man learning to love with his whole being, starting from the hands. "I was wondering if I might accompany you all to the town festival next Saturday." She looked at him for a long time, then smiled in that way he waited for each night. "We'd love that." His eyes flickered with gratitude, and as he mounted Hailstorm, his freshly mended shirt on his back, there was nothing more to say. She already knew, because everything planted with patience one day blooms with strength. The Cedar Brook Festival was the most anticipated event of spring, a tradition as old as the church steps. The town dressed itself in colored pennants, oil lanterns strung between posts, rustic fabrics spread over wooden tables, and makeshift stalls selling everything: peach pies, corn fritters, smoked meats, homemade preserves, and candied apples gleaming like rubies. The air smelled of hay and cinnamon. Laughter rang on every corner, and music twanged from a fiddle carrying the voice of the mountains in its worn strings. The open field beside the new station had been transformed into an outdoor hall, with a floor of packed wood and iron candelabras strung with rows of flickering candles. Elijah arrived early with Clementine and the children, John in a white shirt with hair carefully combed, Willa in a light blue dress, the new ribbon in her hair, Elijah's gift, and eyes sparkling with excitement. Clementine looked radiant in her simplicity, a cream dress with a flowing skirt, her hair loose with a discreet ribbon, and the look of a woman trying to hide that all of this made her feel alive. "Look at that, Mama," Willa cried, pointing at the Theater of Wonders, a small local attraction staged by traveling performers, with wooden puppets acting out stories of cowboys and ladies in peril. Nearby, a man spun a prize wheel of trinkets, rings, candies, miniature horses, that children tried to hook with small sticks. Willa climbed into Elijah's arms, giggling. He held her steady, lifting her above the crowd so she could try to snatch a flower-shaped hair clip. "Ready, miss?" "Go, Mr. Elijah. More to the left. I'm the arm, you're the eyes. If we miss, it's all your fault." "Hey!" She laughed loudly, slipping against him as she stretched her arms. The scene drew fond looks, and among them, Clementine's. She watched silently with a smile, but inside her chest brimmed over. Was joy, yes, but also the sweet ache of seeing her beloved children cared for, by someone who seemed to have been waiting for them his whole life without knowing it. John edged closer to Elijah, tugging discreetly at his sleeve. "Mr. Elijah, may I ask you something?" "Of course, boy." "What is it?" "I wanted to give a candy apple to a girl. Millie, she's in my class. She's got 2 braids and can write words real fast. I want to dance with her. But I don't have any coins." Elijah looked at the boy with solemnity. He knelt down to meet his eyes. "That's a fine idea. A gift with sweetness is always a good start." He pulled a coin from his pocket and pressed it into John's hand. "Now listen, when you give her that apple, look her in the eyes and say something lovely. True, it could be, 'You have a smile like sunrise,' or 'I like the way you say my name.' No silliness. Women, even the little ones, deserve truth and respect." John nodded, squeezing the coin as if it were a knight's ring. "Yes, sir. I promise. And if she says no to the dance, then you thank her for the conversation and tell her she's lucky to own her own yes." John smiled, ran toward the stall of gleaming apples, and Elijah stood up with the quiet certainty that he'd just shaped one more slice of the future. Later, with the children playing with classmates and watched from a distance by ever-vigilant Mrs. Eunice, Clementine and Elijah slipped away from the bustle. They walked beneath the hanging lights to the edge of the field, where the tall grass whispered secrets to the wind and the mountains stood witness. The silence between them was dense and intimate. The moon, high in the sky, poured silvery light over their faces, as if intent on revealing what no longer fit inside words. "The way you speak to them," Clementine began, her voice lower than usual. "With gentleness, with firmness, you make them feel safe and seen. That's rare." Elijah turned to her. His whiskey-brown eyes were intense beneath the soft glow. "I love them, Clementine." She stilled for an instant. Her name on his lips sounded like a confession, like a vow whispered by fate, as if the whole world fit inside that single sentence. "I love your wide-laughing girl, your big-souled boy, and I love—" He paused, his chest lifting slowly, as if gathering breath for the truth. "I love the way you fold the edges of the towel before you pour the tea. The way you hide the sadness in your eyes when you think no one's looking. The quiet courage with which you keep hope, even after so much hurt." His voice dropped, rough with tenderness. "I love when the light touches your hair, when the breeze carries your scent to me. I love your voice, Clementine. Gentle, precise, with that sweet steadiness that calms even what's most restless in me. And your eyes. Green skies that hypnotize me, day after day, as if they hide secrets I was born to uncover. I love everything about you." Her eyes stung, not with pain, but with gratitude, with wonder, with a love that arrived on firm feet and gentle hands. He stepped closer, the warmth of him almost making her forget to breathe. "Let me take care of you all, not just the roof, and not just for a while." She hesitated a second, not out of fear, but because she recognized deep in her soul that this request was more than a desire. It was a destiny knocking, her name on its lips. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes." Elijah held out his hand. She set hers on his with trust. And then, as if sealing an everlasting pact, he lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it. A tender, steady, respectful kiss. A kiss that said without a word, "I choose you, with all that I am, every day." Releasing her hand slowly, Elijah tipped one corner of his mouth and murmured, a playful glint in his eyes, "But before we announce our understanding, I think I ought to have a brief talk with the young man of the house." He winked. Clementine smiled, unable to hold back the soft laugh that rose to her face, and she knew in that exact instant her life would never be the same. And under Cedarbrook's quiet sky, two hearts that had long been touching in silence finally met. The wagon creaked softly along the dirt road, lit only by the lantern swinging from its side, and the sweet glow of the waxing moon peeking through the branches. The festival had left its traces on every face. Wide smiles, shining eyes, hair mussed from so much running and dancing. Willa was already dozing in her mother's arms, the blue ribbon fallen across her brow, her thumb pressed to her lips. John, however, stayed awake, eyes fixed on the stars as if trying to memorize the sky of that night. A quiet smile rested on Clementine's lips. It was almost imperceptible. But there was a different light there, an inner flame that had been kindling slowly, and now overflowed in a tender look whenever she glanced, discreetly, at Elijah. And John noticed. He noticed how she looked at him with admiration, with a happiness he hadn't seen in a very long time. Elijah, who perceived more than he let on, shifted on the bench beside the boy and spoke softly. How about we let your mother and sister go on ahead? It's a good night for a talk, man to man. John nodded and hopped down from the wagon bench when they reached the fence by the house. Elijah helped Clementine down, and she followed the path through the garden with a sleepy Willa in her arms, humming a lullaby under her breath. The two of them lingered a few steps behind, under the moon's silvery light and the soft sound of crickets. So, did she say yes to the dance? John smiled at one corner of his mouth, pride swelling his chest. Yes, sir. Millie said she liked the apple, and that I dance weird but fun. Elijah laughed at that. That's almost a compliment. Your advice helped. I don't know if I'd have said the right thing if you hadn't taught me. Elijah set a hand on the boy's shoulder, with a gesture full of respect and steadiness. I'm glad. But now I want to tell you something important, and I want you to know. I'm speaking as a man who honors your family with all his heart. John looked up, attentive. I love your mother, John. And I love you and Willa as if you'd always been mine. I want to ask Clementine to marry me. I want us to be a family, and I wanted to know if I have your approval. After all, you're the man of the family. The silence lasted a second, maybe two. Then the boy's face lit with an expression Elijah would never forget. If you make my mother smile like that every day, then you've already got my approval. A knot rose in Elijah's throat. He squeezed the boy's shoulder, emotion tightly held. I'll do more than that, son. I promise to care for, protect, and love you all. With everything I have. They walked together to the little house's door, where Clementine already waited with Willa asleep in her arms and a curious look. John went ahead, tugging his mother's hand to lead her to the porch steps. She followed, confused, her gaze dancing between amusement and curiosity. May I know what you gentlemen were whispering back there? She asked, one eyebrow arched. Elijah looked to John, who lifted his chin, proud. I spoke with your boy, who's a man of his word, and he gave me his blessing. Now the only thing missing is for the strongest, most beautiful woman I have ever known to make official before the family. Her answer to my question. Elijah stopped before her, hat in his hands, eyes shining in the soft light of the lantern hanging by the door. Clementine Kerrigan, he began, voice steady yet full of feeling. I came here to fix a roof, and I found shelter inside a home, inside a heart. I love the woman you are, the mother you've been even alone, the delicate strength with which you hold the world every day. I want to make a family with you, to raise your children as if they were my own, to build a future together. Even if it's slow, day by day, will you take me as your husband? Clementine couldn't hold back the sigh or the tears at Elijah's thoughtful gesture. Her heart seemed to dance inside her chest. She looked at her son and saw in him the glow of approval that comforted her more than any word. Then she looked at Elijah, so strong and so tender there, unafraid to love. Yes, she answered, voice thick. Yes, Elijah. With all my heart. With the stir, Willa roused in her mother's arms, blinking slowly. Are we getting married, Mama? We are, honey, Clementine said, drawing both children into a tight hug. And under that quiet night sky, the promise of a new beginning settled, firm, sweet, and full of life. The children cheered, and Elijah bent to gather all three of them in an embrace that sealed something greater than any word. Later, with the little ones asleep, Clementine stepped out onto the porch. Her hair was loose, her bare feet on the cool wood, her light dress fluttering in the night's gentle breeze. Elijah was still there, leaning against the low wall as if he didn't want to leave, as if that porch were the last harbor before a good dream. You're still here. I hope I haven't kept you waiting long, she said, her voice low, almost a whisper wrapped in mist. I didn't want to go without one last moment with you, darling. She approached, and he drew her close with care, as though holding a secret too precious to be revealed in haste. Their eyes met, and for a moment far too long, the world outside ceased to exist. I'm so in love with you, Tiny, he murmured, his fingers tracing the curve of her face as if touching a poem, lost and completely so. And I'll spend every one of my days making you feel safe, cherished, and eager to smile. Clementine smiled, but it wasn't just any smile. It was intimate, vulnerable, warm, like an invitation for him to see beyond the serenity she always wore. I believe in you, Elijah, she whispered, her voice trembling with tenderness. I trust the man you are. The way you look at my children, and at me." Her eyes searched his, shining with something new. Gentle desire, quiet certainty. "You make me feel seen, beautiful, capable of blooming again." He swallowed hard, moved, and he teased with a restless smile. She smiled shyly, retreating a step only to steady herself, then stepping forward again, without hesitation. "I've fallen in love with you too, Elijah, slowly, every day, and now I feel as if my body knew before my heart." He chuckled softly, enchanted. "So I'm the one making you blush like this? You, only you, and don't you dare hold it back. I like what it does to me." Elijah leaned closer, his fingers steady and tender, resting at the curve of her waist. She didn't retreat, she leaned in, ready, her body light, her heart willing. "Clementine, do you have any idea how beautiful you are?" She didn't answer. She simply let him see in her eyes everything words could never say, and he understood. There, beneath the open sky and the stars that seemed to blink down blessings in silence, Elijah Spencer kissed Clementine Kerrigan. It wasn't a rushed kiss. It was long and tender, sealing the certainty between them. His hands drew her closer, both of them shaping to one another as though they had belonged together for years. When they parted, they smiled in silence, caught in a mutual spell. The house was whole, love anchored, and her heart set ablaze with the certainty that this man, strong and gentle, was the destiny she had never dared to ask for, but that God, with tender grace, had chosen to give. A month after that vow beneath the stars, Elijah Spencer and Clementine Kerrigan said yes inside the little church of Cedarbrook, where the bell seemed to ring louder, sweeter, as if even it knew it was witnessing something rare. The pews were filled with smiling faces, handkerchiefs wiping tears, and wildflowers gathered from the trails by neighbors' hands. Willa carried the rings in a basket embroidered by Mrs. Eunice, while John, chin held high, walked his mother down the aisle like a young gentleman. The whole town celebrated, not out of custom but out of genuine joy. It was a union everyone had watched unfold slowly, as if each gesture between them, each glance, each silence shared, had already been part of a story waiting only to be sealed in words. But now the celebration was over. The house was quiet, the children asleep at Mrs. Eunice's after a day filled with laughter and strawberry cake. The bedroom that had once been Clementine's alone was now theirs. That space was a symbol of the love they had rebuilt, the place where it had all begun. The air carried a sweet, hushed anticipation. The lamplight cast soft shadows on the walls, and the quilt quivered faintly under the night breeze drifting through the half-open window. Clementine stood at her dressing table, slowly removing pins from her hair, as if each gesture was preparing her heart. The white dress, simple but lovingly handmade, fell gently like petals leaving the stem. When she turned, she found Elijah leaning against the doorframe, wearing that half-smile she had learned to love. "You look beautiful," he said softly, voice moved. "Never thought I'd see something this lovely and know she's my wife, Mrs. Clementine Spencer." She blushed, but didn't retreat. She smiled, embracing the new name. Within her was a new courage, a woman who had lived enough to know the value of surrender, and was now ready. "I thought I would be afraid," she confessed quietly. "But all I feel is peace, and a longing to be by your side." Elijah crossed the room with steady, unhurried steps. He stopped before her, gently brushed a lock of hair from her face, and touched her cheek with an open palm, a gesture more blessing than claim. "You have nothing to fear tonight, my love. Only to be here, I'll care for you with the calm our love deserves." Clementine leaned her forehead against his chest, fingers clutching his shirt worn out of habit. Elijah wrapped her in a long embrace, as if gathering every moment that had led them there. And in that quiet embrace, both knew their love hadn't been born of impulse, but of patience, of daily life, of the slow building of every sincere gesture. That night, through tender words and lingering glances, they shared a moment of profound giving. There was no rush, no spectacle, only a meeting of souls that recognized and promised again. The golden glow of the lamplight and the whisper of the breeze slipped through the window, as if time itself paused to witness. Later, Resting side by side, Clementine laid her head on his chest, her fingers unconsciously tracing little shapes on the fabric of his shirt. "Are you really this in love with me?" she asked, her voice thick with emotion. Elijah smiled, his eyes lit not by desire but by tenderness. "In love? Yes, hopelessly so, Tiny. I want to spend the rest of my life proving it to you, my love. I want to be the reason for your laughter, your peace, and your lovely blush every time I praise you." She smiled too, a timid, glowing smile only he could summon, and even without words he understood. Her answer was there, in the way she looked at him, as though he were the only man capable of keeping her safe and making her feel whole. And that night, under a silent sky and long embraces, tender kisses, and whispered promises, Elijah and Clementine sealed the love they had built with patience, not as an impulse, but as one builds a home forever. Many imagined that Elijah would take his new family to the property he owned up north. Good land, spacious, but isolated from the beating heart of the little town. Yet he knew from the start that his new life did not belong to the solitude of distant fields. He chose to sell that land and, without hesitation, used part of the sum to care for Clementine's small house, the same house where, years before, he had found a broken roof, but where, for the first time in years, he felt he was finally home. It was there that he truly began to live, with the rest. He fulfilled her dream, a charming shop in the center of town, named with 4 hands, the Heart of Bread. Clementine, with her tenderness and talent, began selling buttery pies, golden loaves, and cakes scented with childhood. Soon the window gained fame and became a mandatory stop for townsfolk and travelers alike. It was common to see someone stepping off the train, point toward the shop with eyes alight and hunger for something only she could make. The railway arrived like a gust of new winds, bringing progress and promise. The wooden station, built with the effort and pride of Elijah and the town's men, was inaugurated amid colorful flags, shrill whistles, and children with shoes polished for the occasion. New families settled, new streets appeared, the town grew, and life with it. The years passed with the gentleness of good days. When John turned 10, he was already a boy with squared shoulders and a decisive way of speaking, following in his stepfather's footsteps with eyes full of pride. Willa, at 8, was the light soul of the house, skipping, curious, still enchanted by Wolf Biscuit's mischief. And in Clementine's arms, cradling laughter in bottles, little Elise, a luminous blend of father and mother. She arrived on a quiet, rainy morning, like heaven's blessing watering the earth, with her mother's delicate features adorned with amber eyes and golden hair, like late summer wheat she had inherited from her father. She was the family's darling. Elijah, even after all, remained the same man of steady hands and tender heart. He worked with wood, tools, and silent promises, while his gaze often wandered to the laughter of the woman he loved and the steps of the daughters who called him father. 12 years later, the house was larger now, with a porch Elijah had built with John, and a new shed beside the garden. A wide yard and a varied orchard enriched the fertile landscape, while the warm breeze carried its pleasant aromas through the air. Willa, at 20, had become a beautiful, educated, and strong young woman, with skilled hands like her mother's, and a dreamer's spirit that made the most praised pies in the region. Elise, 13, was her apprentice, smiling, clever, a charming blend of tenderness and mischief. And John was now a man. At 22, John carried the Spencer name with the dignity of one who had chosen it, not by blood, but by love. He learned the woodcraft at Elijah's side, absorbing more than just technique. He inherited the precise gaze that sees beyond the surface, the silence that welcomes without judgment, and the rare kindness that never asks in return. But in time, he went further. He surpassed his own master in the nuances of carpentry, creating pieces that seemed to hold a breath of soul. His hands, once guided by counsel, now guided others with ease. He was engaged to Millie, his childhood friend and steady love, whom he would soon marry. And in every gesture, from his firm handshake to the advice given with early wisdom, John showed the world he was not just a good man. He was the kind of man who becomes the backbone of a town. A man forged by example, and now, the purest pride of the one who called him son. Hailstorm, the faithful old horse, still rested in the stable, now with slower steps but always alert. Wolf Biscuit had already passed, but his pups, Hot Potato and Sleepy Boots, ran through the yard like guardians of a happy childhood. That evening, they all sat at the dinner table to celebrate Thanksgiving. The food smelled of love and home seasoning. The open windows let in the freshness of dusk. Elijah passed the bread, Clementine filled the cups. Elise recounted the day's tales, and Willa laughed with her head thrown back, just as her mother used to when young. At the moment of giving thanks with a simple yet heartfelt prayer, John, with a voice firmer than usual, asked to speak. "I want to take this important moment to make, in my name and my sister's, a special thanks," he began, eyes glistening and voice sincere. "Mr. Elijah Spencer, my beloved father Elijah, I've never said this properly, but thank you for everything, for giving us a safe home, for looking at us with your heart, for bringing back that beautiful smile on Mama's face again, for caring for Willa like a rare jewel, and for giving us Elise, this precious little sister who is pure joy in this house." Elise hugged him around the waist. Willa discreetly wiped her eyes with her napkin. "You taught me far more than how to hold a hammer or cut wood. You taught me to be an honorable man, to be fair, to listen, to protect, to love. And if one day I am to my children half the father you are to us, I will have won at life. I know my father, my first one, Joseph, would be happy, because we became a beautiful family, one that loves, respects, and cares for each other, no matter what happens. Because of you, Father, and because of Mama too, who was our fortress of tenderness on the dark days. I thank God every day for being part of this family, and for soon starting my own, modeled after the family that made me who I am. So I acknowledge this. I love you, my father Elijah, and I love you, Mama." Clementine wept in silence, her hand over her mouth, her chest overflowing with love and gratitude. Elijah said nothing for a few moments, deeply moved. He only looked at him with tear-filled eyes and a full heart. When at last he spoke, his voice was nearly a whisper. "My son, I always knew you would be a great man. You've always placed the needs of those you love before your own. You have the heart of a king." He drew a deep breath, gazing tenderly at the family before him. "I remember clearly the day I crossed the fence of this house for the first time. A Sunday with a clouded sky, the smell of wet wood, and that feeling that something was about to change. The door opened slowly, and there were the greenest, sweetest, most troubled eyes I had ever seen. Your mother's eyes, guarding you both with the strength of one who faces the world in silence. I remember Willa and John, still so little, with bare feet on the floorboards and hope dancing in their eyes when they saw the rain leaving with the leaks. I climbed that roof with nothing but my tools and the intention to help. But while hammering, I heard from inside a gentle, serene voice reading Psalm 23, as if stitching faith into the threads of everyday life. And then that little voice, and so small yet so full of truth, whispered a prayer of thanks. Willa, with her braids and pure heart, said God had sent me to fix the roof, an answer to her prayer that day. In that moment, I looked to the sky and understood that perhaps the one being mended there was me, because in that simple house with the smell of bread and the sound of prayer, I found more than shelter. I found the place I never wanted to leave again. The light laughter, the lived faith, the quiet love, the home I never knew I was waiting for, and we were even graced with another beautiful daughter to make the house fuller and even happier. If today I am a whole man, it is because you let me in. You let me love, care, learn. The Blessed One here has always been me. I love you more than my own life, and for that I give thanks." He looked at Clementine, who rose and walked to him. She hugged him from behind and kissed her husband's weathered face with a tenderness that said it all. "I love you so much, Elijah Spencer. You changed our lives." He laughed with that low, husky chuckle that always made her heart race. "Ah, my tiny. Of course I love you more. Always more." And everyone laughed and embraced just as they always did. Elise gave her parents a loving kiss, while Willa and John took turns serving generous portions of homemade food, delicious pies, and love. And in that house where everything had once begun with a broken roof and wounded hearts, now there was only laughter, joined hands, and love, so much love, the kind that is planted slowly, and blossoms forever. Perhaps this story began with a worried mother, leaky ceilings, and a pain that burned in the silence of two lonely hearts. But it was love, whispered through the cracks and stitched day after day, that lifted this story to the heavens and transformed every space into a complete home. And if you've come this far, it's because you also believe, as we do, that the simplest feelings are still the most powerful. So subscribe to the channel, turn on the bell, and come dream more stories with us. Because love, oh love, always finds a way to bloom. Share this with someone who also deserves to remember that there is beauty in things made with patience, with faith, and with love. And leave in the comments what stayed with you after this ending. I read every word with gratitude. You are the heart that keeps this channel beating. That's why I thank you, and I'll be waiting for you all in the next video.